Hi guys, welcome to the 4th video series where I will explain you everything from how to start and scale your Airbnb business. And in today's episode we're gonna cover the market research. So we're gonna cover why we're gonna do the market research, how we can find the maximum rents which we can pay, and which systems we have to use in order to do the market research. So with that being said, my name is Nino Scheenhard. I run a holiday home company here in Dubai. Currently we have 30 plus units, and with our best performing month, which was last month in December 2025, with a net profit of 155k USD. So with that being said, let's dive into the market research. However, before we're gonna start with the market research, I want to make sure that the pillars are set. So the first thing which you have to make sure is, which you have to do the right way, is the company setup. This is the first step you have to do in order to start your Airbnb business. So what you have to do is you can get in touch with a company who can assist you. But the first thing which you have to do is to apply for a mainland LLC. Like, there's a free zone, there's a mainland, it doesn't really matter. We have to apply for a mainland LLC because we're gonna do business inside the UAE. Whenever you have the mainland done, you need to apply for the license of the company with a holiday home activity. Once this is done, the whole license has been set up. So you have your name, you have your license, you are ready to start. Not yet, because you need to apply for a DTCM permit. And remember this name, the DTCM. The DTCM is standing for Dubai Tourism and Commerce Marketing. Everything we got in tourism, this is the department. And the DTCM, you need to have a company license, but also for every single unit which you're gonna add to your portfolio, you need to have a unit permit. Once this is done, you think you're ready to start, which you are. Most of the things has been set up, but then the tax authorities, because you have to make sure that you have your reliabilities and your responsibilities regarding the tax authorities. So one thing which you have to do, even while you have done this already, you need to apply for your corporate tax. But you need to make sure that you do this in 2 months. The reason why you have to do it, because otherwise you end up in a fine of 10,000 AED. And you have to make sure that you're gonna avoid this no matter what, because this is just wasting money. So instead of wasting your money, just make sure that you're gonna apply for this corporate tax within the 2 months. However, with that being said, and avoiding the 10,000 AED fine, in my case, I forgot one single thing, and that's the VAT. The value added tax, which is 5%. And you need to apply for this whenever you exceed 375,000 AED in gross revenue. Not profits, not whatever, just 375 AED gross revenue. And if you don't do it in 2 months, another 10k AED fine. And in our case, this was mine. Like, I was that busy with scaling the business, setting the right systems, making sure all the operations was going smooth, and I totally forgot about the numbers. Of course, I tracked the numbers, but I have nothing noticed that I already exceeded the 375,000 AED. So in my case, we exceeded this amount in December 2024, and I applied for the VAT in April 2025, which means that December, January, Feb, March and April, those 5 months, which are the peak months in Dubai, I didn't charge the guest 5%. So I thought, well, it's fine, it's my mistake, I will pay the 10,000 AED. That's not how it works. It's even worse, because even though you have charged the guest, the federal tax authority, the FTA, will charge you 5% up over the gross revenue. So I had to pay the 5%, even though I didn't even charge it to the guest. So probably instead of paying the 10,000 AED, I probably lost around 25 to 30k AED. So make sure that you're gonna do it on time, because if you forget these things, you're gonna end up losing a lot of money. So make sure that you're gonna do this on time, take a photo, take the notes, and make sure that you won't end up with these fines like me. So then we're gonna go on to the market research. So the main question about the market research is why? Why should we do the market research? The market research is basically for 2 pillars, and the first one is to understand the seasonality and the revenue. The reason why we want to understand the seasonality and why we understand the revenue, if we know the revenue and for example, like it makes 300,000 dirhams in a single year. We know that based on these numbers, we know exactly, okay, what is the maximum rent we could pay. We go into it on a later stage, but just for you to understand right now is the revenue which we can make and the rent which we can pay the maximum, like this area in between, that is our profit. So the lower the rent and the higher the revenue, like the bigger that gap is, the bigger the profit is yours. So we want to make sure that we understand the market. That's based on the seasonality. So we're gonna discover what is the demand, how many high seasons, high months, how many low months do we have. But to understand this, it will consist out of 4 things. And the first one is the ADR, which is the average daily rate. The average daily rate, well, I think it speaks for itself. That is just the nightly rate, which we can charge to a guest every night. It's just the average. That's why it's average. In high season it will be high, in low season it could be lower. So it's really important that you understand that you're taking the average. All the calculations which you are doing are just average numbers. And the second one is the occupancy rate. Occupancy rate is what is the occupancy rate based on the year. So for example, it's super easy to get like 95 or maybe even 100% in high season, but in low season it will be way harder. You have to play around with prices to maximize your occupancy as well. But the occupancy rate is just how many nights is it booked. That is what the occupancy rate is. So this one is really important as well, but I will explain you later on in this episode with graphs to understand what I mean with occupancy rate and what you have to pay attention to, because these two are really important. And based on these two, you can calculate the revenue potential. Because for example, revenue potential, you're gonna calculate it ADR times occupancy rate times 365 is. So for example, if we have a ADR, I would say of, let's say 1,080 a night with a occupancy of 85%. So we're gonna calculate, so for example, 85% times 365 means that we're gonna rent it out 310 days a year. Times 1,000 makes it 310,080. This is what it would make based on these two numbers. We're gonna have a potential revenue of 310,080. And to be honest, these are just fair numbers for particular areas. The last one is the seasonality. The seasonality is really important because you want to understand like how many months we have high season and how many months we have low season. And I would say as a standard that you want to have 8 months of high season and 4 months of low season. At the end of the day, we're running a business to make profits. So these 8 months, let's say 6 months is just pure profit and the other 2 months is just to cover these 4 months low season. So if it's the other way around, for example, you have 4 months high season and 8 months low season, these 4 months will never take care of the 8 months of low season. So always make sure that it has at least 8 months of high season and 4 months of low season. If it's the other way around or even less than 8, step out of it, just walk away. Don't just like proceed your market research. However, it's even more, dive deep in it because you have a proper market. That's about the seasonality. But what I will explain as well is the ADRs. How can you understand ADRs and occupancy rate, revenue potential and seasonality in graphs? If we have the ADR, we have a graph. You want to make sure that the ADR always is as high as possible. Considering this is January and this is December. And this is the price, let's say 1,000. If this is the case with the ADR, that means that this part, for example, is let's say 8 months, and this part from Jan till Feb is 2 months. So which means that in this case, if you see this graph, which is basically rocking all the way bottom parts, you have to understand that you are in a wrong market because in here there's 8 months of low season. So basically what you need to look at is markets that goes more like this, which means that only 4 months are low season and the other 4 months are high season. If you see these kind of graphs, you have found the right market. Same thing with occupancy. When I started, this graph wouldn't make sense to me. I really had to understand, okay, what does this graph means to me? So this is just the percentage of occupancy. This is January and this is December again. So what I thought is, well, if it looks like this, it should be fine, right? Everyone told me, okay, you need to have a graph like this and then it should be fine. not understanding the market, not understanding the graphs. Because what's happening in here is in here you have a super low occupancy, super low ADR. So if this is the case for a market, which means that the ADR is hitting rock bottom and even the occupancy rate is really hitting rock bottom, which means that the seasonality in these low season, you can be saying like there's no demand in that case. So what you would like to have with occupancy rate is that it's going to be equal. It needs to be a kind of equal line. Of course, there can be some fluctuations in percentages, but you want to make sure that's an equal line. The reason why I'm saying it is because the occupancy needs to be always above 75%. Because if that means that it's always above the 75%, there's always demand for the area, no matter which season it is. So in this case, with Dubai, it's a flat line, which means that there's always seasonality and always demand for Dubai. However, of course, in low season, you have to drop the prices in order to get booked. If it's like this, even though if you drop your prices, it's never going to be booked because there's no demand. And in this case, there is demand. You're going to be booked 100%. And the last one is seasonality, which is kind of similar as the occupancy rate, to be honest. We can draw the same graph. Because if the seasonality is like this, I always compare it with the ADR. Because for example, this is the occupancy rate as the seasonality, 20% occupancy rate against a price of 200 dirhams per night. There's no money to be made. Like I mentioned, it's kind of the same graph as the occupancy rate. So make sure that seasonality is similar as the occupancy rate, but you want to make sure that this line, especially whenever the ADRs are low, the occupancy is a very important one as well. Because if the ADR is low and the occupancy is low, there is absolutely no demand. So with that being said, because I hear you thinking, where can I see it? How can I find it? Where do I find these systems? The first system I was using was AirDNA. I'm gonna split down the pros and cons for every single system. The second one is Price Labs. And the third one is probably not a well-known one, because nobody told me it in the beginning as well, which is Airbnb. So AirDNA. The first one is that it's super easy to use. Because all these platforms just gonna gather all the information from the platforms to have a proper understanding what is the average daily rate based on real listings, by the way. So what is the average daily rate? What is the revenue potential? What are the occupancy rates? Everything is mentioned in all these systems. But this one, AirDNA, is super easy to use. Not that many features. You just scroll to the area you would like to investigate and all the listings will show up. Besides that, it gives you all the information which you want to have. So it's ADR, occupancy, and revenue. So it gives you all the information you would like to have, because it gathers the information of Airbnb and VRBO. And a lot of people think, yeah, it's fine that they gather the information about Airbnb and VRBO. But for example, if I'm gonna check at one of my buildings or units, I would say in some cases 80% is just coming from booking.com, which means that traffic, it's not being captured because AirDNA is only taken from Airbnb and VRBO, which means that is a con about AirDNA, that it doesn't take any information from booking.com. And that's a huge con for me, to be honest, because especially, for example, I've checked AirDNA on my own units, and in some cases, if we have more than 80% coming from booking.com, it doesn't even show up on AirDNA. But it doesn't mean that it's a bad listing. Maybe it's even better, but it doesn't gather the information. So that means that AirDNA for me is not the best site to use. Another con I would say about AirDNA is that it doesn't have no explanation. Especially in the beginning, when you're just starting out, you would like to have some extra information about graphs, about the information you're seeing, like a lot of things. However, AirDNA is not giving you. They're giving you the raw numbers, they're gonna see the listings, but you don't have the full access to a full explanation, which basically explains the graphs which you are looking. With that being said, brings us to Price Labs. And Price Labs, I would say it's a good tool, but it only shows you graphs, which is super useful, but these graphs are on average. So for example, here you get a house, here you get a house, here you get a house. For example, with AirDNA and Airbnb, you know exactly what this house is making, what this house is making, what this house is making, what this house is making. What Price Labs does, they're gonna take it and they take an average price of all these houses or apartments or whatever they are. So they're gonna make average prices, and based on these average prices, That's at the same time is a con as well, because for example, if this is the Burj view, don't look at my drawing skills by the way, but for example, this is the building, and this is a balcony, and this is a balcony. This is looking at the sea, and this one is looking at the Burj, which means probably, like, I don't know if it's making sense to you, but this balcony has sea view. This balcony has Burj view, which means that this balcony is way more in demand compared to the sea view unit. So this area, this balcony, this apartment can make way more money compared to that one. However, again, Price Labs just take the average of it, which means that the average doesn't need to be here, but needs to be here. Another con is that it doesn't give you explanation, no explanation, and probably Price Labs, you know it from the pricing software. And it's super good for pricing. It's the best tool for dynamic pricing. It's not beginners friendly, definitely not, because you can't apply for Price Labs if you don't have any units yet. So I would say Price Labs is not the best to start with. Then we're just coming to my all-time favorite, which is Airbnb. And this is by far my best one. It's kind of similar as DNA without the cons of the DNA. Because Airbnb, it's easy to use. Kind of similar as AirDNA. It has all the info. It gathers the Airbnb, VRBO. It also gathers from Booking.com and even Expedia. Expedia, VRBO are not really important, because I would say 99% traffic is coming from Airbnb and Booking.com. So all of the information is going to be gathered in this system, which means that you can't go wrong no matter where the bookings are coming from. Everything is collected with Airbnb. Besides that, it gives you a clear explanation about every single graph you're going to see. Because it has an integration with AI, and you can just ask them things. You can just ask what I'm looking at, please give me a clear explanation about this in this graph. And they give you a full breakdown of what this graph is about. You can ask whatever you want and they're just gonna give you the answer. So this one is a super good tool. There's one con, I would say, and that it comes with a subscription. It has like 3 levels of subscription. The higher you go, the more features you're gonna get. But once you have subscribed to this platform, you will understand why this is my all-time favorite. And I use it still for every single market research I do. I use Airbnb over Price Labs or AirDNA. Airbnb gives me way more accurate listings, accurate numbers, which we need to have to understand the market. But there are red flags as well during the market research, because there are misleading things, there are red flags, which you need to avoid no matter what. And the first one is saturation, a saturated market. I wouldn't see that as a red flag. I will come to this one later on. But regarding the saturated market, a lot of people think that a saturated market is not good. But probably every single business is saturated, as long as it's make good money. And that's the whole reason why, for example, in the Dubai Mall, you have the McDonald's, you have the Burger King, you have Five Guys, probably in like a diameter of maybe 50 meters from each other. Because you don't have to reinvent the wheel. If it works, it works. And that's the exact same thing with the Airbnb business. If you have found an apartment which is doing good, you can basically copy paste it, give your own touch to it, but you can copy paste the idea, implement it, execute it, and re-rent it. So that's the thing with the saturated market, because I highly believe in the fact that the 80-20% rule is applied on this saturated market. And what I mean with the 80-20% rule is that 20% of the listings are the top performing listings and the top Airbnb hosts in the market, and this 20% only gets 80% of the whole revenue. So for example, if I'm gonna divide it into 2 pizzas, and these are vegetables on the pizzas and these are the pizza themselves, which means that 20%, this part, and the vegetables are highly in demand, which are the top performers, this gets 80% of all the vegetables only on this part. So you have to make sure that you are in the top 20% in a saturated market. But you also have an oversaturated market. An oversaturated market is a different thing. Like oversaturated market, I would mark that as a red flag. But how do you understand whenever you're entering a oversaturated market? And I will mention it in a graph. So this is the tourism, this is 2020 for example, and this is 2026. So the good thing with Dubai is that it's a tourism-driven city. So the numbers of the tourism always increase. So let's start for 2020 and then we're gonna go increasing with the tourism. However, if the supply is gonna outperform this, but if this is the tourism and this is the supply, if the supply is more than the demand, which means that there's gonna be a gap, which means that there is more supply than demand to get the units filled. So in this case, whenever you see these numbers or these graphs, you're entering an oversaturated market and you need to make sure that you're gonna avoid no matter what. Whenever you see this, walk away, because it's super hard to get it filled. Even in high season, but it's way more harder in low season. Another one is extreme seasonality. Extreme seasonality. We already went over it in the beginning of this video, but you always want to make sure that you have 8 months of high season and 4 months of low season. Because you want to make sure that you're gonna make all the amount in these 8 months also to cover these 4 months of low season. That's the whole point, especially in Dubai, because it doesn't make sense if it's the other way around. That doesn't really make sense. So the higher this number is, the better it is for you. And the lower the low season amount is, the better it is for you as well. With this being said, that brings us to the third one, which is the local restrictions. I wouldn't say it's a red flag from like straight away, but it depends on the local restrictions. So for example, in Dubai, there are many restrictions. You have to pay the tourism fees, you have to apply for unit permits, you have to apply for many other things. However, the local restrictions also stimulate us as a tenant, because we're gonna be protected. There is rental protection in Dubai. So for example, the eviction notice is 12 months. Local restrictions, you have to make sure that you understand these local restrictions. You have to understand what you have to do. Otherwise, as in my case, if I didn't apply for the VAT on time, I will get fined. So they're super hard, they're super strict, but the local restrictions could work against you as well. So for example, in Barcelona, in Spain, or maybe in other countries, as far as I know in Spain, like every city or every area have their own regulations. And if they support the landlord and every rule changed overnight in Spain, for example, or in every area, which means that you have to change the photos, or maybe you need to apply other things, which can cost extra money. So local restrictions, it could be a red flag, but only if it is against you. So make sure that you do understand these local restrictions in order to get into the market. Even though all the numbers are fine, like there's no saturation, the seasonality is good, the ADR is good, the revenue is good, this is good, but if the local registration is there and it's against you, because you just have to consider it as follows. Because for example, if you have the rent unit, you have furnished the unit, you have paid that much amount and invested that much amount into a unit, and after 2-3 months you have to vacate the unit because the rules changed overnight. You lost so much money. So that is about local restrictions. The other one is low occupancy with high revenue. Before I'm going to continue, I'm going to draw something. I know if you know what it is, but this is Palm Jumeirah. Low occupancy with high revenue, and Palm Jumeirah is the best example ever. For example, especially the fronts. On the Palm itself, they also have some good apartments, definitely worth looking into it, but the fronts are the perfect example for low occupancy with high revenue. The reason why I'm saying this is if you look into the market, for example AirDNA or Airbnb, you're gonna see a huge amount of villas which are rented in high season for a shit ton of money, for example, maybe even 10 million on a month. I'm just saying a random number. However, these rents in these areas are super high as well, which makes a shit ton of money on high season. It's targeting a specific audience, and that audience is like super wealthy people, and that audience is super small, which means that you can get it filled on high season because then you can make a lot of money, but in low season you can't make that much money. Probably it's super hard to get it rented because these audience, they are not willing to come to Dubai in low season whenever it's like 45-50 degrees. Those people are partying in Saint-Tropez, Ibiza, wherever they're gonna go to, maybe Amalfi, because they are spending their money in European countries where it's around 30 degrees. That's what I'm trying to say. The high revenue is good. It's really attracting to see these numbers that much. But if the occupancy is not working, you will probably end up losing money even though you're making that much money. So once you understand the market and you know the numbers, you know the revenues, you know the occupancy rate, you know the average daily rates, you know that all the local restrictions, for example, are working for you, then you can finally execute on finding your first deal, and that's the property acquisition. And that's basically what we're going to talk about into the episode 2. We're going to dive in the property acquisition. How can we convince a landlord? How can we reach out to the agents? How we can convince the agents? Do we need to provide the agent with a booklet? How can we sell us? Like, what kind of strategies do we use? A lot of questions which I will answer in order to understand the property acquisition. So let's dive into episode 2, and I will see you there.